All right. So today we're talking about humor and about acceptance. But I want to start just with a little meditation that they put in there about rejoicing in the new day. And it's actually meant to be done by you alone just before you go to sleep. And so I'm going to send this to you just so you can have it. Remember, he starts off by saying you should do an intention for the day. And then this is kind of an end of the day type of thing. So just kind of relax for a second, because it's almost the end of the day, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And you're starting by just reflecting on the day. You know, it could even be while you're lying down in bed. Just take a few minutes just to think about the day. Consider the important experiences, the conversations, the emotions, the thoughts. Although it is important not to focus too much on what you did or did not do. The point is simply to note the major features of your day and consider whether your day was in alignment with the intention you set in the morning. But then pay attention to your emotions and accept the experience that you had. Reflect on all the emotions that came up during the day. If negative thoughts and feelings arise, just be present with them. Don't try to push them away. Don't try to push away the negative and grasp the positive. Just acknowledge what happened. If you are disappointed with some aspect of how you acted, put your hand on your heart and say, I accept myself as I am, flawed and human like everyone else. Notice where you have fallen short of your intention, because that is part of what will allow you to grow and learn. If something painful happened in your day, you can gently acknowledge it by saying, that was painful. I am not alone. We all suffer at times. But feel gratitude. The most important quality to have about your day is gratitude for what you have experienced, whatever it was. Even if for you it was hard, even for whatever allowed you to have to learn and grow. And if you keep a journal, it may be a good thing to write those down. Then rejoice in your day. Whatever it happened, what is it that you can rejoice in? Pick something you did that will help you feel good. Maybe you helped someone. Maybe you kept your cool during a conflict. If you can't think of anything you can rejoice in, then just rejoice in the fact that you are doing this practice at the end of the day. And then look to tomorrow. Turn your attention to the next day and begin setting your intention for what that day will be, whatever the challenge comes. Today, how did you experience joy? What came up for you?
I got to have like 2 seconds with a gal that I went to massage school with 33 years ago. She was here in town and she had a painting to give me, but it was pouring down rain, so I opened up the car door. But the painting is done by one of our other classmates from that many years ago, and it's a beautiful painting that will go into my office, and it just brought me great joy. I didn't really, I wanted to talk with my one classmate, but it was just those few seconds, that because it was during the downpour.
Yeah, and sometimes that's all you get is just seconds, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and we both had our masks on.
Mm-hmm. How many, Joe? You're muted still, hon. There you go.
Got it now? Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I think having the rain was such a joy to be able to sit out on the back patio with a cool breeze and, you know, the cold rain, and just be able to enjoy that was joyful to me.
Yeah, you don't get that as often in Arizona as like some of the areas of our country.
I think it also was so important to visualize like our mountain, you know, the foothill or the Catalinas, and how it was being doused with rain, and how important that is to know that things are, you know, being cooled off up there too.
Yes, thank you. Any other joys of the day?
Well, I went to Safeway and bought some roses and an orchid, and I was really happy to have those in the home. And also, I got some brand new watercolor paints today in the mail, and I'm trying to self-teach myself with the art. So that's kind of been a real focus in my sheltering time. So that was a good thing.
Nice.
And just the whole fact that the bighorn fire is 100% out is really joyful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my joys was kind of a weird one because I do not typically rejoice in meetings. Just not, or my joy comes from as a general rule. But I sat in the open committee today, and we just had a really good place where we went in different directions, not just so much what are the specifics as just some of the directions of how we were thinking and feeling and looking, and it just was a really good conversation. And maybe I'm just starved for conversation, so I'm beginning to find joy even in meetings, right? But that was good for that to happen. And I wish it had been something like, yeah, tomorrow we're going to open. And it wasn't that. It was like far away the opening is still, but at least it felt like we made some really good, we made some good progress in our own heads, at least. Joy comes in a lot of different ways. One of my favorite types of joy, favorite practices of joy, is humor, which is our first topic for today. And how many of you have found humor is a good tool for you? And how do you use it?
Well, I happen to have this book right here. It's Gary Larson's cartoon.
The Complete Far Side, yeah.
Yeah. So Mike bought that for me for Christmas, and I'm now on book 3. There's like 3 of these huge things that he did in the 80s. And I just do a few of those at night before I go to sleep. And they're fun. They're fun to share with Mike, and he's got such a goofy way of looking at the world. It's fun to have somebody else's perspective that's totally different than yours.
Yeah, well, that. Gary Larson's perspective is quite a bit different than most of us.
Yeah, that's the truth. You know, another one is Jim Gaffigan. We've been watching him. He's a comedian that you can Google, Jim Gaffigan. So funny. I mean, I laughed so hard the other day watching that program. It's the most I've laughed in 5 months. It's called Quality Time. So if you Google Jim Gaffigan - Quality Time, he comes up. Yeah.
Good. How do the rest of you use or experience humor?
I poke fun at myself,
Uh-huh.
especially when I'm in a little bit of a tizzy, and it gets me out of it.
Yeah, and I think that was very clear. What part of what the author was trying to say is we have got to not hold ourselves too seriously, and especially when it seems like we're about serious business. Sometimes that means that we can't that we think every single thing is of such import that we can't laugh a bit around it. There's a lot of serious import right now, isn't there? But maybe some of that lightness is what we need more than dealing seriously.
I mean, there's so many serious issues going on that I think you have to really schedule the lightheartedness time. You know what I mean? Because to me, it doesn't seem like there's enough time in the day to deal with all the issues, let alone find that time.
But at least part of humor is holding everything lightly, not trying to schedule it in a way that we counteract the deep darkness with light. It's just holding it in such a that all those serious things we're doing in such a way that in the midst of it we can also say, but it's not the end of the world, but it's not going to knock us completely. I mean, humor to me to a certain extent is letting that humanity shine. That's why I'm glad he went into the thing about humor and humanity and humility and the connection between all of those things. Because sometimes the seriousness stuff, it takes us into places that forgets just the grounding that we have, and humor brings it back down to that grounding, even if it's because we make fun of ourselves.
I really like to find the time where I make myself laugh. I was like, well, that was stupid, and laugh, and chuckle about it. And as I look at our names on here, one of my chuckles for today is, my last name is Adair, Adair, and I messed up long time ago, and my last name on here is Adara, Adaia. So
we already changed it.
my chuckle.
We already changed it in the church records, so you know.
Oh, okay, so I'm Adara in the church records.
Just so you know, in case you were wondering who that was. The hard part about humor is how many have ever been wounded by humor in some way or another. Because it is sometimes a weapon. And we have to be really careful not to do it that way. And you can see in this book that these two great holy men use a lot of humor, often pointed at each other, but not as a weapon, but as a way of reaching out and being a friend and acknowledging, the teasing that goes back and forth between them is remarkable. We have to be careful not to use it in the sarcastic way that is meant to slice someone, but in that which hopefully with love makes a point sometimes, but not trying to hurt. And that's difficult because when you get in your most animosity-ruled relationships, it's easy for humor to become more pointed, more difficult. And you don't want that to happen, because at least part of what humor can be on the notes page that I have, one of my favorite quote was right near the end, where he said, "Stop asking why me and start recognizing that life happens to all of us." And humor is that which hopefully draws us into the common humanity that we are, right? And we can all laugh about it. That's why I sometimes have to point the humor at me, sometimes have to knock down the walls between us, but trying to say, let's remember who we are. Because that'll help us open up to joy. The good news about humor is it also is a great way to be able to open us to different perspectives. A good joke often turns what we thought we were seeing on its ear. And that's what we sometimes need in life, is to see it differently than what we saw before. my grandfather was really good at that. He was a poet, and he would often look and just see things from a very different perspective. He was a cowboy poet, and so his poems were about, poked a lot of fun at himself. He went to Round Valley High, and his poem about Round Valley High, said, "Congratulations, because I was the worst student ever there," type of things, right? But it makes it so that he's looking at this grand institution of that little town and says, yeah, it's not perfect, and neither are we. But it is where we get educated. So how do you use humor? What's your typical way of being humorous?
I like corny humor.
Okay.
And of course, I had corn for dinner tonight, so there's some corny humor.
Yeah. We have a friend of ours named Ross, who is in Sun City as a pastor, and he is the punniest guy, right? Just stupid jokes, right? But it just lightens up a moment. Anyone else? How do you use it? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to tell you, my sister imitated me on the phone the other day, and I didn't like it. And I think she was trying to be funny, but then I thought, well, my little ego got wounded a little bit, and I thought, well, I don't really sound like that, do I? And then I thought, oh, lighten up. She's being funny, and take it that way rather than getting all sensitive.
Yeah. And I think you're right that humor is one of those things you have to be very careful of. If I make a joke, I have to see, have I in some ways wounded, because I want to say, it's just a joke, but maybe I need to be aware of where it didn't quite hit the same way for that other person. Because if what I'm trying to, what? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I feel like you and I both use teasing. I don't know if that counts as humor. We think we're funny, but if we like you a lot, we'll tease you a lot. And sometimes, Jim will do that even in the middle of preaching, and I kind of cringe, like, oh, I hope everyone knows that he's, joking. So I think we both do that a little. Yeah.
And I typically am joking except for when it's about, oh wait, better not say that.
Just like that. Perfect example.
I think husbands and wives, there's humor that's like just between the two of you, especially if you've been married a long time. It's really fun to know that nobody else would get that but your spouse. And I enjoy that kind of what is that in humor?
Inside jokes.
Inside jokes. Thank you.
Yeah. Because sometimes that kind of humor is not even funny. It's just something you went through that just puts a smile on your face.
Yeah.
So what I like about humor in the setting of what they're saying is that this is one of the tools of the mind to be able to help us find joy. Like we can think about how to bring joy into each other's life. In the midst of tense situations, they talk about how humor can lighten it up just enough that then we can deal with it better. When we look at the absurdities of our own selves, whatever prejudices or positions or whatever it is that we have, and we can look at it lightheartedly, then we're able to sometimes deal with the difficulties of whatever that other person is presenting as well. At least part of what humor is about holding lightly life. And it's not that there's not serious things to think about, but not everything has to in every moment be dealt with only with that hard grip. Because that hard grip that puts tenseness not just in our fingers, but in our hands and shoulders and all the way up, often makes us deal with that important issue poorly. Where humor, where we lighten up a little bit and let go of some of the tenseness, allows us then to see that tension between us very differently.
Jim, when you've presided over a funeral,
Yes.
I went to a lot of funerals where there's humor
Mhm.
and it lightens the whole mood of the event. And I'm so appreciative of that. And do you, as a pastor, do you consider that or interject that on purpose?
Absolutely. Here's why. We all know things about whoever, if you're involved at all in that person's life, you know that person's not perfect. And if you're in there just being very serious about that person, you're really not acknowledging the whole of the person either. Part of the reason why we're there is because of the joy, the lightheartedness, all of that they brought to us, not just whatever things of import that they did. In fact, I would venture to say that for most of us, we don't connect to that person because they were a great and an important person, but because they somehow entered into our heart differently than others, right? And much of that is because of the lightheartedness that we carry them. And so it's good for us to remember all of that and the imperfections of who they are. Because we don't love somebody because they never made a mistake. In fact, we sometimes love people more because they are a flawed human being, right? And we laugh about those kinds of things, which makes them a very unique person that we knew, not just the great and wonderful person that they might also have been. But that's not who we know as much. I guess part of that, kind of to make a transition to the next chapter, is exactly what that next chapter is about acceptance. Humor allows us to be able to see something and not have to see it just for the negative that it is, but just to see it as present in life. Joni will tell you that there are things that we will never agree on perfectly. We've been together for 20 some years now, 26 years. And there are things she still needs to fix about me. But at least part of the relationship is when we've realized that good or bad, that is what the reality is of the other person. And I think that if you're continually trying to fight whether or not that should be part of the other person, you're going to have a hard time being in the relationship itself. If you're in a situation and you're trying to fight against whether that should be, instead of just being present in that situation, whether or not you like it, you're battling the wrong battle, right? You can say, for example, when you're pregnant and about to give birth, that you don't want there to be pain. That's just the reality of that moment, right? And you can be in that pain and that struggle knowing that it's carrying you somewhere. Right now, Joni is going through this beginning of the school thing. There's a lot she doesn't like about it, right? You can imagine every school teacher is going through that. And you can go that in a way of saying, I hate it and I'm not going to deal with it. Or you can say, here's my reality this year. How do I, in the midst of COVID, do the best possible? But first of all, you have to accept that COVID is just a reality.
And I
That's-
think
Go
the
ahead.
other reality is that those kids need you now more than ever. You know, that the role that you're stepping into is so valuable to so many of these children. And I think that's what's going to help teachers step forward
Yeah.
and take up that, you know, that's their calling. You know, I have to say I'm thankful it's not mine right now. But I can understand how important the role of the teacher is. And boy, I'm sure the parents agree with me.
One of the phrases that they use in here is the phrase "as you would wish it." How many have at least one thing in your life that you would wish it different than what it is? Right? And how many know that you don't have any control over making it as you would wish it? There's things that are just the way they are, whether we like it, whether it's simple, they just are the way they are. And if I spend my time and energy trying to make that different, trying to change the reality of that, sometimes I lose the opportunity to make the best out of that. There are things that can be done in the worst of circumstances. But if we're so busy trying to fight the circumstances, sometimes we don't change what can be changed. Does that make sense? I was talking with Sarai a while ago, and we were just remembering how, in some ways, that was the worst of circumstances for them. But because I wasn't the expert that was going to fix the circumstances, what I got to do is I got to be present with their family. And I got to just be there in the midst of who they were. Sarai and Francisco lived here at the church for several months as he went through deportation hearings to try to get him an ability to stay here with his family. If I had just fought the one direction, I might not have been able to have the chance to be present for him. And it's that relationship that's the most powerful part of that time for me. So think back about your life. What are some of the places where it was difficult for you, but you also remember back to that time fondly for how it helped you to become whatever it happened to be? And if you were still fighting the battle of trying to change that situation, you might not have transformed into something else. Where did it happen for you?
I think about every time Jim gets transferred to a new church, and boy, oh boy, I want to fight that because I like where we are. I like the people. But when I finally give that up and go into the new place, it's always so many blessings from that new experience. But I always fight it, it seems like.
And I think that fighting it is not an abnormal thing to do. I think that that's understandable, but it's not always as helpful as what we think it will be.
Well, it never works. Me saying, I'm staying here, you go. Yeah, that doesn't work.
Yeah, no matter how much we think it will. For me, it's kind of more of, wait a second, I'm missing this person. Why is this person who was in the last church not here? And I try to make somebody into that person.
Mm.
And rarely is it as helpful as what I think it might be. Partially because I forget some of the things that we're paying about that other person.
Well, you know, I have a girlfriend, my best girlfriend. I've known since we were 15. She lives in Seattle. And in high school, we were like Mutt and Jeff. We did everything together. I think we laughed all 3 years. In high school, we were laughing a lot. Anyway, we would go out to lunch at the Seattle Art Museum. And she's an artist, but unfortunately, she was diagnosed 7 years ago with Parkinson's. And instead of shaking her, it's manifested into like halting everything. Like she doesn't move too well. And so we have we connect often with email and calling, but we've started doing this thing about, you reminded me, with the wish. So what we do, well, I wish we could go out to lunch in Seattle together. And then she always tops it. No, I wish that we were in Amsterdam and we went to the Van Gogh Museum and we had to get. And so it was kind of like this fun thing that we do for what we don't have, then we wish the way it could be. And so it becomes like a humorous thing to do together, which lightens everything.
Well, and the nice thing about that is it's acknowledging that all that is there, but it's also saying very clearly to both of you, we know that this is our reality, even though this might be calling out to us, but you're living in the present reality, which is good.
So there's one thing that I really enjoyed the chapter, reading it. There was one thing that stood with me. I'm hoping that I got it right. It had to do with how acceptance leads us to joy. With acceptance, it puts us into the present moment, and then the present moment leads to joy. And that opened my eyes. I never looked at it like that. That was nice.
Yeah. If you notice the subtitle of the chapter, the only place where change can begin. You can't begin after fixing everything. You have to begin right here in this moment. Right? This present moment is the place. And we all have reasons why we'd rather not be in this moment, whatever that moment is. There's something else that would call out to us. But here is where change happens. And accepting that this is where it is allows us to be there. So thank you. What do you fight with about life? What do you wish you could change? Besides, my cousin Bob, of course. We all want to do that. Where are you most challenged to just be accepting of life?
I have one of my sisters, excuse me, who is bipolar, and we have very different opinions about many things besides politically. And one of her sons is bipolar schizophrenic, and I would love to change so that they stay consistent with their medication, because when they're on their medications, I can be around them. I can have conversations with them, but when they're not, I have to stay away, and I'm sad that I have to stay away, but I just can't, to protect me and literally my life. I have to stay away from them if they're not taking their medications.
Yeah. Thank you.
There's lots of situations with the current state of things that are challenging. And, I think to accept, what is makes it easier. You know, I know, Joni, you're going back to to teaching, and that just hits me so hard. Especially with the virus still so rampant. I think that hits me the deepest with the children, and just for the economy and the lives. And what can you do? And I'm impotent, so I could shrivel up or just accept what is and say, tomorrow's going to be another day, and maybe it's just not that bad, and just look towards the future in the sense of antidotes, a vaccine. My mom is very, very elderly. My sister's really stepping up to take care of her. Mom lives by herself. My sister lives in a separate place, and I know my sister's totally stressed out, and I've offered to help, and I just can't. So accepting what is and not forcing a change that I would like to see. I think that helps me in this way. I try really hard to take the larger view. And with the larger view, everything is where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But don't you think,
Go ahead.
don't you think though there is a balancing act, like John Lewis, if he accepted the way life was and didn't cross that bridge, and you know what I mean? You got to fight for some things to make them change.
Oh, I totally get it. The chapter talked about totally. You said you have to take action, but you have to accept what is, and then work from there.
I think it comes down to the saying that they used right at the beginning, right? At the very start of the chapter, and it said something like, "Why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy if it cannot be remedied?" This is how my granddaddy used to say it. For every worry under the sun, either there's a solution or there ain't one. If there's a solution, hurry and find it. If there ain't one, never mind it. And I think that's where acceptance comes from. There are things you can do. John Lewis knew that there were things that he could do, and so he did those things. He also knew there were things that were way beyond him, right? That took something more than just him to do. And so there's a certain amount of where you have to be okay with that larger force moving.
Yeah, there was a good sentence in there also in the sense of the difference between complacency and acceptance.
Yes, it is not a complacent place. Thank you.
And you're not complacent.
That's right. So you can be active and there. You're not just sitting around waiting. It's not a passive thing to do that. You do fix what you can, but you also relax in what the day brings. And none of us do that perfectly. I'm sure John Lewis did not do that perfectly, right? But if you look at his life and how he changed us, right, the world, because of who he was, it was pretty amazing. And it calls us to that same type of thing. I think what you're trying to do is approach it differently than what you would approach it. At one point, they said, instead of anger, instead of hatred, instead of fear, and then he goes into what you should have. There's these things that you could have: anger, hatred, fear. Instead of that, you cultivate compassion. You cultivate kindness. You cultivate warm-heartedness. So it's how you're approaching it. If I'm approaching that day and I hate that I have to be here, that's not helping. You're saying, somehow in this day I'm going to approach differently. I think that's what acceptance is. And it's hard because every day brings something that you would rather have different. The last little while, for whatever reason, my neck has been sore. And so I wake up with a headache every morning. I'd rather not do that, right? It'd be great to change that. And I'm trying to take medicine beforehand or whatever. But you also have to just say, the headache is what I have this morning. I've taken the medication that hopefully will do away with it, but the headache is what it is. How many have had to figure out a certain amount of acceptance as you've aged? You know, because some of you look like you're almost in your 40s. And in your 40s, things begin happening a little bit differently, right? You have to decide, what do I do with this ache that may and may not go away? And you can fight it, but it may, you know, that doesn't mean that it goes away, does it?
No, fighting it will make it worse.
Yeah, sometimes exactly right. And that's especially true in many of our relationships. If we're just reacting negatively to that relationship, sometimes we just deepen it and deepen it. What do we do to be present, present with that person rather than present against that person? So what resistance do you have to life? What's the thing where you're fighting life instead of relaxing into life?
I think obviously having to be home all the time. I want to fight that, but you can't. But that's challenging. I'd like to fight it. You know, every day I think of, oh, what if I did this? Or what if we got together in this, you know, aspect? And then I just know I have to be patient and wait until that, you know.
What's funny about something like that though too, Joe, don't you think that there were times in your life that you were going, I wish I had a little bit more time to sit at home?
All the time. So
Right.
many times.
And now that you have that time, and I think that's not untypical of most of us, where we fight the very thing that we wished for earlier. How about the rest of you? What is your resistance?
I have a hard time getting older.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I do what I can today to age gracefully.
Yeah.
But I still have a hard time getting older.
Yeah. Yeah. The good news is there's a whole bunch of stuff that if you're like most people, you are much better at today than what you would have been in your 20s, right? Age helps us to accept things much better, where a 20-year-old would have, some of the aches and pains that go on, would have fought that, tried to power through it or whatever. So we've all gotten better at those kinds of things. And I was training for my marathon. It was 10 years ago right now that I was training for my marathon. And my 18-year-old self would have been so embarrassed by my 51-year-old self, right? Because I was slow at 51, trying to run the very same distances that at 18 I was really good at. But I had to accept that this is who I am. And that 18-year-old never did what this 51-year-old was planning to do. Never ran a marathon. even though he could have, probably much easier than the 51-year-old self. But it takes knowing that I am who I am right now. And life is what life is right now. So I had to get past my resistance to want to be that other thing, that younger self. What other resistance do you have?
Well, I was going to add to what Lewis said. It is Lewis, right? Okay. I'm the baby of the family, and I'm lucky to have two older sisters, so I can ask them questions. Well, what's it like to be 75, 76? And I think when you're the baby, you've always seen yourself young. Whereas if you're the oldest, you've always seen yourself older. And so I think that, I don't know where are you, Lewis? Are you a baby or?
Middle child.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's just been my experience is I've always been the young one. And I always felt like I was the young one on the staff when I was teaching. And then that changed year by year. When I left, I was like probably the oldest one at the school other than the janitor. And so I was just, that was a new weird role for me. But now I can think of myself, well, I'm the young one in the group of retirees that I hang out with. I do think there's a certain amount of, you do want to fight it. You do want to exercise. You want to eat well. You want to, do what you can and not just give up.
But acceptance is not giving up. It's
Okay.
realizing what's true.
Okay.
That makes sense? So
Yeah.
You're not just saying, okay, death, come and find me now. It is living the truth of the moment where you're at. Not trying to turn it into whatever the truth was when you were 20, or the truth that you wish was there, right? Think of it this way. Think of some relationship you have, and when that person is gone to another place, say that they're off on vacation, right? You can fight about wanting them to be with you and in your space, but the reality is that they're not. Tomorrow they may be with you, but today you have to realize that they are where they're at, whatever that is. Trying to make them be here isn't fixing that. Trying to, in the midst of them being there, trying to still feel them with you is acceptance, right? You realize that they're gone, but you can still feel them present. If you're so busy fighting for them to be here, sometimes you don't feel the presence that is already there. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you've got to figure out. If it's daytime, you can't all of a sudden make it night. You have to accept that it's day right now, and vice versa. No matter how much you like summer better, if it's winter, that's where it's at. So it's being in the reality where you're at, because in that reality, then you can be open to whatever that reality is, and to the presence of the people around you that are there. Which means sometimes you're in the midst of struggles. But if you didn't, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please.
If you deny the struggle that's there, then you never truly deal with the struggle. Right? There may be something you can do about that struggle, but if you're trying to deny that it's there, the chances of you dealing well with it are low. You do have to do whatever. You don't want to just accept that death is here because you retire, right? There's a whole lot that you can do, but you have to accept that this is now my reality. Louis, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to hit this maybe from a different angle or maybe from the same angle. I'm 66, so I've been trying on my age now for a number of years, and I'm in relatively good shape, and I'm aging well. But I'm working at doing the right things. But the idea that I'm old is really hard for me to muster. And we had this thought that came from someone, and I've adopted it, and I've adopted it in other ways too. It's reframing. It's a matter of how do I want to look at it? And maybe this is the same thing that Jim was saying, but instead of me saying that I'm old, I say that I'm getting older. And it's easy for me to accept that because I am getting older, even though I don't feel old.
Yeah.
So in the sense of not changing anything, but the way I'm framing it to myself. Now, I can't delude myself and, say it's black and it's really white, but if I can definitely believe what I'm saying, then it's easier for me.
Right.
So you have to work at finding something that works, and of course, if you're missing someone, they're not there, but you have the spirit of the person with you, why not choose that?
That's right. I am, like Lois said, I am 61. I can fight to try to be 45, but it won't happen. I can define what 61 is. Right? I can decide what do I do with a 61-year-old body. I can't make my body younger than it is. I can do whatever this body right now today is. If we're busy trying to fight what is, then we really never get to using what is and being present in what is. Right? The biggest thing around death that I've realized happens is that what you're trying to do with that one who has died is you're trying to figure out how to let go of, I used to hold his hand, and now I can't feel the physicality of that hand. And you're getting to the space where instead of having to hold a physical hand, you get to hold the spiritual presence, and trying to figure out how to go from this as reality to that as reality is the difficulty. And the more you're trying to go back to getting this, the more you're going to be frustrated as you're trying to heal. But that's true about any of our things. If we're focusing on something that is not true right then if we're trying to get what is not true, then we will never get to what is true. Does that make sense? And all of these places, the good ones, and maybe especially the bad ones, as he said, he used the metaphor of turning ourselves into the wind and feeling that that's just the reality of this moment. In that truth, then you get to instead of deny what exists, you get to live in the midst of whatever is there. If that wind is right there, right then you have to live in that presence of that, which may mean that you figure out a way to to get something between you and the brunt of the wind. But if you're just trying to fight whether the wind is there, sometimes you just stand out there and yell into the wind, which does what to the wind? Nothing. Right? You can't scream away the reality. You have to live in the reality so that if something needs to be done, you can do it.
I like to think too, Louis, I'm 66 as well. And so I'm like
Who wears
closing
it
the,
better?
pardon?
Say, who wears it better?
Oh,
Just
thank
kidding.
you. I think that, closing the door on my teaching, it is also a threshold into a whole new way of looking at teaching. Like I'm doing these online things, and I've got a 6-year-old student I'm going to be teaching art to in August, and I'm thrilled to have her. And I think that I'm just, it's a threshold. It's not the ending. It's the beginning. Like grandmother Moses, she didn't start painting till she was 78. She didn't start. So I figured, gosh, what will I start at 78? And how far can I take this? So I think, like you were saying, Louis, you need to reframe it and look at it as a beginning rather than an end. And even when somebody dies, when my mother died, of course, that was very difficult. It was 26 years ago. But I also had this strange feeling of relief. And it was relief that she had passed and, the pain and the dying was over with. But it was a different relief as well. She was the queen of the family, and I was just one of the 3 princesses. But in her death, all of a sudden we rose up and we all had new identities. And I was not expecting that feeling at all. I was expecting grief, which I had, but it was such a complicated collection of feelings. I didn't expect that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like that idea of a threshold and starting new.
So I'm going to send you a meditation for you to do. And it's a meditation on acceptance. And it's about looking at how to deal with all the things that we're talking about. Focusing on the present moment, focusing on the nature of reality, focusing on what not trying to change what did happen, but being present in what is happening right now. And so, let me just show it to you so you can see it. As part of that, right at the end, number 11, it says you can also choose to recite or reflect on one of the following 2 passages. So here's one of them down here from the Buddhist tradition, but you'll see the other one up here, and it's from the Christian tradition, but listen to it. I think you might recognize it. God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. Much of about acceptance is about praying that type of prayer, which allows us to do what we can and not what we can't, to be where we are and not where we are not. It's that this type of meditation is trying to help us to do. And it's a continual coming back to remember this moment, not whatever manufactured last moment or next moment we would like to be in. As Louis said, it's about being present right here, right now.
Jim, could you also send what your grandfather said?
Oh yeah, I'll write
Please.
that on a piece of paper for it. I'll send it in the stuff that I get,
Okay.
that I send out.
Thank you.
All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your time. Next week.
I have a quick question, because
Yes.
I always do at the end, but it's for Nancy. What is the name of the author and what is that name of the videos? I just said Jim Gaffigan, but how do you spell Gaffigan?
Gaffigan. And the name of his comedian stand-up show is called Quality Time.
Quality.
Yeah.
And is that on YouTube?
It's on, well, you can check it. Netflix, you can Google Jim Gaffigan and it may come up just in the Google.
Okay,
Very-
thank you. Thank
He
you.
also speaks almost every Sunday morning
Yes. Yeah.
on CBS Sunday morning.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
There's a little section that he does.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the day.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you,
Thank you.
Jim. We
Bye-bye.
appreciate you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Great.